Good morning, everyone. That was very kind of Aaron. He may have overstated my role in all this, but it's field trip day, so I'm excited for you to get outside a building and get to see what's going on. And as I was preparing for today, I realized after the last couple days there was absolutely nothing new I could tell you. I mean, there's been great speakers, there's been great dialogue, there's been great thought. You yourselves have brought a lot of energy here. And so what I thought I would do in the brief couple moments we have with you this morning is strip it all back to the beginning. And think about it in this way, because I'll bring this perspective to the table. If you're an elected official, if you work for an elected official, if you're in a policy-making body at a city, I think you can come to a conference like this and you certainly get energized. The president talks yesterday, and there's a lot of energy, and you go into a breakout session and people say things and everybody shakes their head in the room, and then you go back to your city and you start talking to their citizens and they're scratching their heads saying, what are you really talking about? And there is a challenge to that for all of us, because while for those of you that are at this conference, it's probably instinctive to be moving down this path, and you probably are surrounded with folks that are helping support this, that it's instinctive for them to move down this path. Not all your citizens are there with you right away. And I went on a journey with my citizens, and I've worked with mayors in cities across the country that have decided to make this a policy issue for their city, and how to deal with interacting with citizens that perhaps aren't all the way there with the vision yet. So I want to share with you a little bit of what that learning was for me, some techniques that I use, some ideas that I think are valid, and try to race through slides fairly quickly. I'm not going to, all the stuff that is about the case to be built, you already know and you've talked about over the last couple days. And then, is there anyone here from Google this morning at all? Did you raise your hand? And then if we have a couple minutes, if you have any questions for me, I'm glad to try to answer those to the best of my ability, honoring relationships. So I absolutely believe that for success to happen after you're already got a commitment with a private partner, if you've made a commitment to build this network, it's incumbent upon leadership, whether that's elected or otherwise, in the community to get out there and talk to the broader citizenship. This is a real commitment by a city. It's a super commitment if the city decides to take it on all themselves. But even if you bring a private partner in, you can say that most of it's on their shoulders. You're still going to be called to the carpet as a leader in your community about why the city's taking this step, why they're doing this, why they're making those commitments. And I think it's incumbent upon leadership that believes in this from a policy-driven initiative to go out and interact with your citizens about it. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I think are the techniques that make sense. You've got to talk to people where they are. And there are folks along the spectrum in this area, and it's not completely evident, even though their president's talking about it, what this all might mean, particularly when you start to talk about gigabit speed. You're going to have a lot of people really, I think, scratching their head. So what we did in Kansas City, and what I've seen other mayors and leaders do in their cities, is sort of strip it all back to what you do in city life. What's the bread and butter of cities? And in many ways, you could make a really persuasive argument that the bread and butter of cities is infrastructure. And that infrastructure really is what the cities own. Cities own infrastructure. They own implementing infrastructure. They own maintaining infrastructure. They own leveraging infrastructure to improve the daily lives of their citizens in all kinds of different ways, and using that infrastructure to move the city forward as well. And quite simply, and you've heard this talked about over the last couple days, what we're up to here, the business that we're up to, there's all kinds of amazing things that happen on the back of this, on the backbone that's created, but at the end of the day, for a city, I think it helps, particularly inside of City Hall and outside, to say this is a lot like streets. This is a lot like water. And if you start at that place, and you say fiber can be equivalent to that, I want to take you on a journey about how your mind might allow people to see that as it is, and then open their mind to what it might be. And I'm going to pick on economic development for a moment, because I think that most elected officials dwell in this world a lot. It's a fun place for a mayor to be involved, particularly if you have some wins. And it allows you to get out there in front of your public and articulate certain things, because economic development's multifaceted. It can improve quality of life. You certainly want to articulate the reason that you get in this game in one way or another is you're going to broaden the tax base. So if you have citizens that are interested in tax burden, one of the ways to sort of lift tax burden, if you think of it that way, we might not all think of it that way, but one of the ways to lift that is to broaden the base. If you're able to build things in your community, the base is broadened, it helps. And then the final thing is really, still the world that we dwell in after the economy collapsed. We want to create jobs. We want to build businesses. We want a dynamic that supports quality of life by way of job creation. So in Kansas City, Kansas, when I was out talking to people about this, there are certain tangible things you can point to. Any city has them. We built a soccer stadium. We got involved in that. We had incentive in that. Why in God's name would you do that? There's all kinds of reasons, but at the end of the day, for our citizens, it resonated. This was a quality of life thing. It offered them an opportunity around entertainment, and I was amazed by how much engagement, quite frankly, because sometimes public support for stadiums and for professional teams can be controversial. In my city, people loved it. It was a gathering spot that they didn't have. It was a point of pride for them. It definitely made a difference in quality of life. And then there are the physical ways that you can talk about economic development. You attract a new office tenant, you build new hotels. It broadens that tax base. It creates new jobs. Manufacturing can make that same claim. So there's sort of the bread and butter kind of economic development examples that you can show to people in your community and they will get it. That's why we expect the mayor to be involved in this. Here's what happens. So let me talk about the potential for us of Google Fiber, for some of you as well, and others that might provide ultra-high speed and why it's important. And let me begin, and I did this in my city and I've seen other communities do it. This is not an old message. When Google started sort of this shining a light on this issue, they asked cities like ours if they were interested. And 1,100 cities applied. You guys know this. And if you dwell in sort of municipalities, that 1,100 cities is nearly every city of scale in the US submitted some form of an application to them. And we certainly did as well. And I did this because I think you got to localize these ideas. So when you're out talking to your citizens, you got to make them realize what things are about. You heard a little bit about this flavor, and some of you have to live with this idea that cities compete against one another, even right next door. Well, you've heard about that. We do that in Kansas City too, unfortunately far too much. But what I simply did was I just circled the cities around ours that had also applied that we knew about, and showed our citizens that there were all of these cities in just our 2 states that did the same thing, validating the idea for someone that doesn't know or is a skeptic that you're not the only guy that thinks that this is an important thing. And even as we've been a couple years along from this, the idea that this is somehow or another a foregone conclusion, or the momentum is so big that it's already going to happen everywhere, I think you can't just accept that. If we take that map of 1,100 cities and we even superimpose upon it where Google says they'll go to all these places, hopefully, and they'll make that announcement shortly, even if we put all those on the map, we're not close to 1,100 cities. We're not close to most of the cities of scale in the United States. There's a lot of room for this to happen still. We're still at the very beginning, and I think the message for any community that ventures down this path now is you are really on the front end of this thing. You're not following, you're leading. You're going to be in a distinct place and position as you venture into this kind of a project. And by the way, and all of you know this doesn't happen overnight. The internet's fast and it's getting faster and things are instantaneous when you use your computer if you have a high-speed connection, but building that high-speed connection takes a lot of time and a lot of hard work and a lot of phone calls to City Hall when somebody's mailbox gets hit by a contractor that you have no idea who they are, okay? So you know that if you decide to venture here, and even if you move fast, you're far ahead of many other cities that are out there in the world. And as I said, we dwell in infrastructure, and connecting sort of the slides I just said, that infrastructure translates into tangible things in a community. So let me make that connection for you in a localized way and think about how this might apply to the city that you are in today. And let me just start with this. You're going to be on a field trip today. Maybe you know a little bit about Kansas City. But Kansas City is centered, both Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri, both are centered on where two rivers meet at what's called Call Point. Lewis and Clark encamped there for 2 weeks as they journeyed west from here, where the Kansas and Missouri rivers meet. And that really was the beginning of infrastructure, the essential tools for this city to sort of locate where it is today. All cities can trace themselves back to something that was significant around this in the way that they were located. And I just took an aerial shot of Kansas City where those two rivers meet. And you can look at the density. It's the highest density part of our city. No surprise why, right? Everybody wanted to be by that river, the original infrastructure. And in fact, our first airport, you can see it up there at the top of the slide, our first airport was right next to the river, for goodness sakes. And the state line, if I could put it on this slide, I didn't do it today, runs literally right through the middle of this. So commerce knew no jurisdictional boundary. They knew that from a commerce standpoint, get by the infrastructure that's going to make things work. That's what happened in Kansas City. And we became the second largest rail hub in the United States as a result of this. And you can imagine, I mean, agribusiness was huge. We had farmers all over the Midwest. They'd bring in their products, their goods, their cattle, their livestock. It would be processed here and then sent on this rail infrastructure out to the United States and the world. It's still, this is what made Kansas City blow up, by the way. And it still is functionally an extremely important part of our economy. That infrastructure, boring as it may seem, massive as it may look on this screen, is what built this city. And so I go back to that slide. Remember, I circled all the cities that applied, and I just relate it back to, close to home, where my citizens know the story. And I put that red box around the loop highway that exists around Kansas City, I-435. You'll approach it as you go back to the airport today if you're familiar with the town at all. That red box was the last stretch of highway that was built. So think about highways, a proven model of infrastructure. This country, local governments, state governments, we spend billions of dollars a year on highway. It's not just to move people around, right? It's not just to move people from one place to the other. There's a promise behind building that highway. We all know it. We expect that if we put that money into the highway, cars just won't go up and down it, but commerce will locate by it. That there will be buildings and things that come to that stretch that build community. And it's a proven model all over the country. In my city, this stretch of 435 sat dormant for over 20 years. Highway was built, nothing came. 20 years. 20 years later, though, no one could have ever expected that right next to what I just put on that red box, that Kansas Speedway, a NASCAR speed track, was built right at I-435 and I-70. For us, a signature economic development project that really rebranded our city, a point of pride with nearly any of our citizens except the most skeptical. We all have them, right? So think about this for a minute. The story when this happened about 15 years ago was not about how great this was. The story, the controversial story was, what kind of incentive did you have to give these guys to build that track here? It was all about that. But I would contend to you today, and those of you that deal in this kind of work and know it, I would contend to you today that you could write the biggest check you could imagine in your mind, that a city was capable of writing. And that speedway would not locate where it is right now if that infrastructure of I-435 and I-70 wasn't there. It's an essential component to economic development. Essential. Had to be there. Infrastructure fundamental to growing a community. So let me just let you think about the economy today. Those are proven models. They still work. We can kind of guess where they might go. But we have an economy that's rapidly changing in front of us, including in Kansas City, that's driven more and more by technology, and even our largest employers, we'll talk about small employers later, even our largest employers dwell in this world. In Kansas City, the examples from Garmin to our Med Center to Sprint, some of these names. Cerner is a healthcare medical records company, digitizing medical records. Their entire business is based on technology. It's based on data moving. If that didn't exist, they wouldn't exist. So our economy in communities is changing rapidly. And we need to think about whether we're building the infrastructure that supports that kind of activity. So let me transition just for a moment and talk about what 1 gig might mean. This is the hardest thing in the world to talk to about somebody that doesn't see the picture as you see it today. And I really think you kind of have to get them where they are and take them on a bit of a journey. So let me take you on my journey and give you a sense of where we've been, what we've learned from that, and what might it mean for the future. So I'm a lawyer, and I'm getting older. I will say this wasn't cutting edge when I came out of law school, but the Alexis terminal was certainly in a lot of law firms. And this was the internet that was out there at the day. You took the phone and stuck it on a coupler, and you had a green screen in front of you, and data came so fast that you could read the data, the text of the law book, as it drew on the screen. Anybody of you remember this? This is a generational thing. But this was cutting edge. To take books and be able to access them in a database and serve them up right inside of your law firm was unbelievable, earth-shattering in many ways. Could you ever imagine anything more than being able to get that book onto a green screen in your law firm? And you just fast forward, just take this journey with me for a moment and think about, this is Meg Ryan. Do you remember the movie You've Got Mail? The whole idea behind You've Got Mail is AOL, you're in this closed environment around the internet and people can send these electronic messages and love is created over the internet on AOL, right? You've Got Mail. Amazing. Changed everything. How could it be? What's the transition between that green screen and AOL and You've Got Mail? Well, obviously technology, but speed of data was part of that transition. Take another step and think about for some of you, just kind of looking around the room, the first time you interacted with the World Wide Web, where data could be served up inside of a browser, and what that looked like. You know, in the databases, you had somebody in your office maybe that knew all the secrets. They knew how to get onto Medline, or this was the Kansas City Star back in the 90s. The whole paper wasn't even there. It just was sort of links to things in the community and maybe a couple of forms you could fill out to subscribe and get it sent to your house, right? And then, you had search engines now that have been purchased by the big guys and they sort of have folded all in, like Alta Vista and the secret codes. This was the cutting edge. Blue links to other things. Amazing. But as speed changed, so did really everything. And so I'll just pick on Netflix for a moment. We could put up other companies, but think about Blockbuster Video. How's the Blockbuster Video business doing in your city? Right? Think about that. And Netflix was revolutionary. Remember when they started? It wasn't about what we think about now. They just had a different way to get you the disc. You got on the computer and said, I want this movie, and they would dutifully mail that disc to you, and you told them when you were going to mail it back, and they would send the next one to you, and you never have to go to the store. And now you all know that the Netflix business is not really about that at all. It's about delivering that movie into your house, streaming, so that you can watch it immediately. And this is very current, none of that happens if speed isn't fast enough to deliver it. And none of that happens if speed isn't fast enough to deliver it in the quality that you want. That's where we are today. All of that because data is able to transfer in a way that allows this kind of revolution to occur. Music's the same way. I mean, as a teenager, I went to the record store all the time. It's kind of the cool place to hang out, right? Record stores don't exist anymore. My kids don't even know what that concept really is at all. And I've almost forgotten it, quite frankly. It changes everything. I did this with one group in my city, and there was a woman that was a retiree. She was probably in her maybe early 70s. She raised her hand and in all sincerity was scared to death that her pharmacy may be closing next week because everything else had closed, and what was she going to do? But it does change. So you don't have to be engaged in electronic commerce to have this affect you and your city. It's real, and you've got to let people know that it's real. I was just at CES. I had a fun time. I got to speak there for a little bit, and I jumped in this BMW all-electric car, and I can't believe it. They just let me drive it off out just into Las Vegas for a little bit. I was shocked by that. I got there early enough that everybody was still in their hotel room, but I brought it back, I got out of the car, and the car drove itself back to park itself. And think about that. I mean, that's happening today. And even in the Internet of Things, so if we take a step back from the idea of delivering something to your screen, the transfer of data at speeds that are greater than they are today has the chance to revolutionize everything. We might not know what the next thing is, the killer app, however you want to talk about it, whatever has been discussed for the last 2 days. It will be difficult with some of your citizens to explain that. But it won't be difficult if they would go on a journey with you just for a few minutes, for them to realize what's happened in the short span of time in their city, in their home, and what this infrastructure potentially might mean going forward. And asking them to make a commitment to make sure that your city is one that is on the front end of that and doesn't get left behind is the kind of thing that I think you're asking your citizens to join with you on. And by the way, it can be a very fun journey. So let me give you one last slide on this vein. Does anybody remember these? What? Some people don't. It's a cable box. I was the teenager that fought like the Dickens with my parents to get cable TV installed in my house long, long time ago, and they finally broke down like I do now with my kids. I give in. So I gave in, and this got installed one day, and I was playing around with it after school, and my dad came home, took a look at the box, and saw me there sitting, and he said, "There's no one under God's green earth that needs 37 channels of television." Think about today. We think nothing of the fact that we can stream a movie to a device that's in our pocket. To me, it's Star Trek kind of stuff. It's a real product now. There's technology hard at work. And that's really what we're talking about, right? The expectations change as data speeds through into your house. And we're all on that journey together, and I really do believe we're at the beginning of it, not at the end. And for us, that journey was about a public-private partnership with Google Fiber. For many of you, that may be what the journey is for you too. There's all kinds of ways to come at it. The president talked a little bit about the ability of cities to do this on their own. I'm a big believer in cities. I do believe that cities hold the key to our future collectively as an economy. And I think local control and decisions are extremely important, and there are cities that can take this journey on their own, and will make that decision. And there are others that may just seek to use a franchise agreement, a traditional franchise agreement, to spur someone in their community today to build the infrastructure that is needed today and is required for the future. You're going to go, I have slides that show this, but you're going to go on a field trip now. And that field trip really is sort of the next step. It's the story that we can tell today that we couldn't at the beginning because it wasn't happening in the way that it is. Whether it's the Kansas City Startup Village that is creating small business and entrepreneurs that happened on its own in our community. You'll see that today. That didn't happen because some city gave a tax break to someone or there was some favorable incentive that got put on the table. That whole energy, that whole opportunity came because the infrastructure was built. What you'll see down in the crossroads, what you'll see in Google Fiber, I'm fine, I'm good. What you'll see in all of those places aren't things that happened because, I wish I could say it was because the mayor got everybody in a room and brokered this great economic development deal and they made it happen. It happened because the infrastructure was in place. And the infrastructure not only provided a direct opportunity, it provided a billboard to build opportunity, to talk about innovation, to attract those that are interested in innovation, and to really build a new kind of economic development. An economic development that's focused less on using incentives to pick off someone from your city and bring them to mine, and more about building an infrastructure that attracts the kind of talent and people that are needed to create the economy that we know is happening now and will happen in the future. And there, honestly, in my mind, is no barrier to this for any city. The barrier to this for the city is to make the commitment to the infrastructure and then find the right way to move down the path and journey to get it done. All of our cities have the opportunity, and like I said 2 days ago with many of you in the room. This is the kind of economic development that doesn't pick an immediate winner or loser. The winning and losing's a little bit down the road. And so you can't instinctively talk about it in that way. You've got to bring your community down into that journey where you're building this infrastructure for the future and allow it to happen. And that's a little bit different than the 4-year election cycle that I was on as mayor. Because what we're talking about now is building something that will have some immediate benefits, no doubt about it. But you're really building a foundation for the future of a community. So yes, it's a lot like a street or a highway, but in many ways the potential is much more multifaceted than the examples that I showed you at the beginning. So good luck on your journey, both here today as you go on the field trip and as you go back to your cities. I'm so excited that you were able to spend some time in Kansas City. We honestly believe that as we journey down this path together, that cities that are able to figure out how to collaborate around this kind of infrastructure are the ones that will build a dynamic that's beneficial to all of us, and we look forward to continuing a relationship with you over the course of time as you are on this journey along with us. Thank you all very much. Have a great rest of the day and safe travels.
You know, sort of wonder if more than a handful of communities start to do rapid deployment of types of projects. Do we have enough workers in this country to do all this work? I mean, isn't there also that kind of issue of where's the workforce? What kind of training do they need? I work for an electric utility. We're seeing a lot of retirements, a lot of folks that are really about the expertise, gone. I mean, we've got clearly a baby boomer cycle that's going through retirement. What about that workforce issue to get all this stuff done?
Yeah, no, it's so the questions around workforce, and a lot of times when you start to talk about these things, it does bring to mind, it's a multifaceted thing, so you start to worry about things that you were worried about before, but they make you even more nervous. So, you know, we've heard a lot about digital inclusion. Well, think about this from a city perspective. I really didn't talk about this, but I think that there's a revolution going on in city halls, and I think in many cases, there are some cities that are very progressive, but sometimes cities are not necessarily progressive in the way of technology. But when I as a citizen can transact all my banking, including if you wrote me a check, I could deposit it on this device, and I'm still asked to go to City Hall to do some very simple functions, at some point, if we don't catch up to that in cities, from a competitive standpoint, articulating quality of life, we're gonna be on the losing end. So we have to be all the way in this, even though in many of our cities, there's a sizable number of individuals that aren't part of this economy at all. And so and if we know it's going there, we're not going to stop it. We're not going to slow it down. What are we doing to make sure that opportunity around this digital environment is getting into those places becomes something that, you know, myself as a citizen and former mayor is of deep concern, that alone. Secondly, if you look at in Kansas City today, even before Google Fiber came, we're creating more engineering jobs than we have engineers for. So our biggest companies, some that I showed you, are having to recruit far away from Kansas City to attract the engineering talent that they need just for today, let alone what we think might happen in the future. We're not growing enough of our own, and that's a real issue, and it's a real issue across the country, I believe. So education becomes paramount, and are we aligning education relative to the kinds of jobs that are being created is of deep concern, and I think that this is going to accelerate. I do think that cities are going to build this infrastructure. I think it's going to put more pressure on what's going on, and so I think your concern is a great one, and I share it. I'll give you one last example, an area that I think is fascinating to me. How many of you are involved in city government or support local government? I don't want to talk to you. Okay, great. Okay, think about this. Transparency is a big deal, not just to elected officials, but I think to those that work in City Hall. And in many ways, transparency is sort of been built around, a facet of transparency has been built around this handshake around an open records request. Open data challenges all of that. Open data says there ought not to, for most of the data you have, no one ought to have to be sending in any kind of request. That data should just be served up. Well, I think that's going to intensify. And cities are going to have to spend more and more time thinking about what transparency means to their citizens as the immediacy of data across the world is able to be delivered to them, and yet the city hall that they live in, they can't understand what's happening when the snowplows go out on the street. So that pressure's coming. It's here today, and not all of our citizens know it yet, but there's a sizable number that do. So we can't just answer that issue. We have to bring people along with it. And it causes, I think, I think the concerns have always been there, but I think you're going to see more and more cities and mayors get more directly involved in education because it becomes so functionally important to what they're called on to do, particularly around the realm of economic development, quality of life. Breaking down a barrier, maybe. Any other questions at all? There's one over here, one back there.
To answer Charlie's question over here, being a company that over the last 5 years we've seen really explosive growth that started off as the guy knocking on City Hall by himself as a project manager. A few cities embraced us and we grew, but on the same note, we need this workforce, and there's a lot of companies like us that are posed for great growth. They may have families that build infrastructure across the country, or may have partnerships, but there still seems to be this disconnect between, just because we don't have Google after our name, or KPMG or IBM, there's still this disbelief amongst this group of cities that companies like us actually have the ability to provide the services that are needed. But at the same note, we talk about innovation and entrepreneurship and needs of the future leaders. And I think until that chasm is crossed somehow through leaders such as yourself, we're going to continue seeing lack of workforce and utilities and what have you. So how do you get through that? And how do you take the blinders of suspicion out of the way and truly look at what's truly before you? Because 15 years ago, there was no Google.
Right.
There was no Apple that started out of a garage in Microsoft. So it's frustrating, but on the same note, how do you get around that? How do these cities be more open-minded?
I wish I knew the answer to that question, and that probably is a whole session we could talk about, and I totally agree with your assessment. I'll give you an example. CES, for the last 2 years, I've been on a panel about fiber to the home installation, and it's changing from year 1 to year 2, but there were plenty of folks on the manufacturing and distributing side that really didn't have a full sense of what was going on with data delivery at the local level. And so there was even a disconnect there to a certain extent, which was fascinating to me, given that particularly this year, nearly every device that you saw on the showroom floor was a connected device. So the idea that there has to be a backbone that allows a robust enough connection to make these things work it's everywhere at the show, and yet for some it still is not. The idea of connecting that back to what's happening in infrastructure at the city is not completely there. I do think Google provides a billboard. And I think when they announce whatever number of cities, I hope they announce all of them, in the next week it will provide a momentum, and I believe that there will emerge new entrants into this area that are going to see this as a real opportunity for them, and they're going to start to engage cities that are interested in moving forward, and cities that say, I'm not going to wait around for a fancy brand name. I'm going to find someone that's capable of doing this, and I'm going to do it. And I think once that momentum builds, I think the story becomes easier to tell. But we can't allow those that get this, that are out in the industry. Google gets this because they're in this industry. They have to have a flow of data to make money, right? We can't allow them to be the only ones that have a voice in this. I think number one, I don't think it'll work. Google has a lot of brand quality to it. There are plenty of people that are going to do this that don't. And if you don't have individuals in your community, and you've heard a lot about this sort of grassroots stuff, that are out there talking about this in ways that get beyond the brand name, then I think you're not going to get the engagement that you need to sort of change minds. So I think it runs in several different directions. We've got to take advantage of Google's billboard around this. It helps that the president's talking about it. I don't want to make it overly political. You know, it always worries me at the Washington, D.C. level. Sorry if some of you all that dwell there, but you know, I'm a city guy. I think we know how to get things done at the city level, you know, and sometimes, you know, things don't happen as quickly in other places. So this isn't about politics, but it is about leaders that might be in elected office saying how important this is and making the connection. So I think that's very important to give those leaders the wide berth to allow them to talk about this. So not a great answer to your question. I think it's a dilemma that we all are sharing, but we're on the front end of it. So I think momentum will build and will make that easier than it looks today.
Looking back, and I think one thing that's become clear to all of us here is that when it comes to revolutionizing a community, bandwidth alone doesn't get you there. Looking back from the city side, what are some of the best investments or the best programs that you initiated, you say, helped take that bandwidth and used the city's efforts as a catalyst to turn it into new development? Was it, we look at Casey Launch, we look at going out and seeking these places, but looking back, what were some of the best things that the city?
I think the single most best thing I did was reach out to Mayor Sly James and create a bi-state innovations team that brought people outside of City Hall together to think about what this potential might be. They laid a framework and a dynamic that is still paying dividends today. I said it 2 days ago. It created Casey Digital Drive, and it quite frankly brought you here. Because without that infrastructure that we built by way of bringing good people together, we wouldn't have the opportunity to be sharing with you today. So I think that was so it wasn't a policy we passed in City Hall. It was a collaborative we formed outside of City Hall that I think made all the difference. And all of you, I think, instinctively see this. For this to win, for this to work, you got to bring education together. You got to bring healthcare together. You've got to open the doors of opportunity for them to sit at a table and collaborate, and then let that loose and let that do things that you might not imagine. It's kind of different than command control, as some might think of it. It's very much the opposite of that. I think cities get that. I think we know how to do that at the local level. So I would encourage you to figure out where's the collaborative that you can help spur that's not just inside of City Hall but outside, and allow those talented people to start to figure out how to leverage the opportunity. You can't do it alone, and I don't think you want to necessarily. So that'd be my answer. Bi-State Innovations Team.
So it's clear that doing gigabit build out, you have to prioritize all kinds of infrastructure. And here it was focused on residential. You had folks who got some houses and created sort of a business element to that. So if you were king, or if you have advice to communities in terms of prioritizing buildings and businesses versus residential, how would you look at that? What advice would you give?
I don't know if I have great advice. Every community is different. As you ask that question, I'm thinking this is uniquely Kansas City. If I could have anticipated what would happen when we started negotiating with Google and we started installing, I would have worked on the digital divide sooner. There's no good answer to this. But I want to send a message of inclusiveness around this technology. I do believe it's the utility model works the best. So I don't believe giving away high-speed access is the answer here. I believe fully engaging those that don't see this as a real way that it may change their life is something that's fundamentally important. Not every city may have that to the same degree that we have it in Kansas City. So that would be answer number one. Answer number two is, I would guess at the beginning of this, I would want to see businesses installed at the same time as homes. But I think the advantage of going fiber to the home first is it's different. Your citizens get to make a choice. Well, I'd never done an economic development deal where I basically could go out and say everyone in this room will get to make a decision as to whether you want to have this or not. I'm not telling you should or shouldn't, but this is something you have to make a personal decision about. It's absolutely fascinating, and I think it was good. It caused people to think. And so it also causes elected leaders and those in policy making to make sure when you go out and talk about this that you don't get into a branding argument about favoring an incumbent over an overbuilder or a new entrant. You've got to talk about what this infrastructure might mean, not necessarily what to consume. And I think that dialogue was good. I think our citizens were able to engage in that. So in the industry, you talk about fiber to the home. I think fiber to the home is a fundamental part of this. Getting all the way to the house is the way you really are going to change a community. But I would have liked to have seen businesses turned on at the same time as houses, for sure. Would have made my life a lot easier, and I think it would have accelerated some things.
My question is around the whole idea of measuring success. We know that the providers have a business model that meets their revenue needs. If you had an opportunity to articulate what you would look at to determine success in terms of the rollout of fiber and KCK, KCMO, what would that be. And, I know that things have to happen holistically, but I also think that, as our big city move forward and learn from what you all have done, there really has to be some way to measure success, for these initiatives, because in many ways, the taxpayers are investing. So what would you say about it?
Correct. So I'll relate back. My experience is going to be a little bit different than yours because we were on the very front end of this in our conversations with Google, and there's no secret to what we negotiated. So we felt this was fundamentally important at a base level at the house, right? But we also knew that for some people that might not make a difference. So what's the public benefit beyond that? Can you articulate it in some ways? We can more easily do that today than we could at the beginning. But we did a simple thing in our negotiation: hook up our libraries, our schools, and our city buildings at no cost. So that if you never become a consumer of this product, somewhere in your part of the city, you can access this for your benefit. That's a tangible public benefit that you can articulate to someone that is not necessarily a consumer. Second part, we were deeply worried about this. I'm sure that many of you are as well. The way that franchising works in Kansas and in many states, in some respects, we don't know where a provider's providing a certain level of service in our city. We wanted the opportunity for this service to be delivered to all areas of our community, including those that we said in the language we put in the contract, economically distressed areas. Now, interestingly enough, in our negotiation, it's demand driven. So we all got in this boat together, and some of you may be on this journey at some point where we were also out there having to make sure that folks that were in these areas of our community that had not seen this kind of robust service over time were ones that were raising their hands enough to have the opportunity for the backbone to be delivered into their neighborhood to be hooked up. That's real. And that gets back to digital inclusion. And boy, it would have been great if I would have known 6 months before that we were going to have to get people ready and thinking all over our city about what this might mean. To get them energized, it would have made things easier. So I would say, at some level, for an elected leader, a public benefit that's broader than a consumption at home, which is a benefit in and of itself. So I'd argue that all day with you. But a public benefit that's greater than that, and then making sure that your city as a whole, in a demand-driven context, I'm not against that, has an opportunity to take advantage of this access. No matter where you live in your house, the opportunity may come there if your part of the city says, we're interested. I think those can be baseline measures of success, and then you've seen, and you'll go out and see the other things that are going on that sort of prove up the economic development and entrepreneurial and all those other things. So.